Good evening, online pipe community. Ethan Parsimonious Piper here. Once more, I am together with Fathers Richard and Brian. And this evening, we're going to talk about iconography and religious articles. Now, as a Protestant, we often think, oh, well, we don't dabble in iconography. That's idolatry. But the truth is, when we think of theology as the study of and worship of God, getting to know God through the Word, iconography is the study of worship and getting to know God through imagery, through art, through icons, but through things that are physical, things that are not necessarily purely spiritual, but have a context that we can interact with in the physical plane. This iconography starts in the very first couple of chapters of Genesis when we're told that we, in fact, are created in God's image. We are icons of a sort of the man or of the one who created us, and the man that he created, who is our ancestor, was that very first icon. And this continues. As Protestants, we are sometimes leery of iconography because we think of it in terms of idolatry. And yet, in the Old Testament, God Himself had the Israelites create things like phylacteries, which were a way to have a touchstone, a physical, right there, literally in your face touchstone with scripture and prayer, and a reminder of our position and what we were supposed to do throughout the day. In the Protestant churches, icons that we still have, things like the empty cross. Well, we contrast that so very proudly with the Roman Catholic Church, which uses a crucifix. Um, and in truth, we're simply emphasizing different aspects of the very same thing. We're emphasizing the resurrection by using an empty cross. Our Roman Catholic brethren are emphasizing Christ's suffering and the sacrifice. Both of those are important, and we need to not forget that cross is in fact an icon. Similarly, many of our Protestant churches have stained glass windows. What is this imagery? Why do we have it? Well, it reminds us of biblical stories. It reminds us of things that God has done in many ways, in the same way that the ancient Israelites were told, pass these things on to your children, tell them, teach them, so that they and future generations will know what I, the Lord your God, have done for you. In the same way, we use stained glass windows to remind us of biblical stories. Um, and this kind of iconography imagery goes on within Protestant churches as well. Our iconography just tends to be different, and it tends to be emphasized in a different way than the churches in Rome and then in the East do. It doesn't make us arbiters of how icons should be used, and so there's a wealth of Christian art. When we talk about worship and using physical objects to allow us to open our hearts, open our minds, and to focus on our Creator. I personally, as a Protestant, I look at so many of our modern Protestant worship services, and I wonder, are we worshiping God, or we've got a band up there? Do we have pop idols that we're really focused on them and not on the God that we're supposed to be focusing on? I happen to like modern music, so don't think that I'm being hypercritical there, but we need to be aware exactly of everything that we're doing and how things that we may not view as icons or idols can actually go from a good thing to a bad thing in our own worship. And so we need to be really, really careful that we're not logging around a large plank and pointing out someone else's splinter. Now, Richard, one of the things that you wanted me to emphasize, and I'm going to come back to this because I think it's so important, is the iconography of us as an image of God. We spent an entire section of one of our videos talking about what it meant to be created in the image of God, how important that is, how central to our very being and our being able to understand our position in the universe in relationship to the God who created it. And to me, it's fascinating that we, in fact, are icons of the God who is our creator. Take us away.
Yes, thank you. As a matter of fact, that very iconography of us as image, we're created in his image. Well, the only image of the Father is the Son. And this is as true in our Old Testament as it is in the New. It is true in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, where there is a Yahweh in heaven, and who upon whose face you cannot look, or you will be unmade. And there's the Yahweh on earth who's talking to Moses, who stands at the foot of Samuel's bed, who meets Joshua with a drawn sword and is the commander of the army of heaven. He, it's him with his hands. God has hands. They belong to his logos, forming the clay into his own image, because he's the image of the Father. And it is the Holy Spirit who breathes life into it. This gives us a really, really, really important basic theological concept. Christ institutes, the Spirit constitutes. The Spirit breathed life into that image. And there's a whole lot of stuff going on there in that chapter. It's the most complicated book in the world. Thank God. Thank God we were given this marvelous, marvelous collection of books that became a book, because it is a book, because of the way each piece ties into the other in thousands and thousands, myriads of ways. So I have with me an icon that you have seen hanging in every mainline Protestant, now including Baptists here, every mainline Protestant Sunday school room.
Yep.
There he is, the Good Shepherd. My wife and I saw this for sale at the flea market. It's old. Look how old. It's faded, but it's precious to us. This was how Christ was introduced to us when we were little children. And that image is still powerful. Well, now, I have a Coptic style icon of this same thing that's hanging in our church, our temple. The church is the people, the temple's the building. That's an Orthodox thing. And it's just as beautiful, though it's in a very, very different style. Now, here's the thing about Eastern iconography. Oh, there are schools. There's the Cretan style, which was led most powerfully by Fotios Kondoglu, the brilliant iconographer. There is the Coptic style and the Neo-Coptic style, which started in, I think, the 1920s. But what it's doing is cleaning up and re-emphasizing all of the things that were originally in the old Coptic style, which, by the way, looks a whole lot like the stuff in the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Book of Kells. There's a reason for that, fellow Celts, fellow Gaels, and it's because the church came to the islands from Egypt. And then from the islands into continental Europe in the Dark Ages, when everything was failing and fading in what had been the Western Empire, the light of civilization was carried back into that bloodthirsty place by monks from Ireland. They saved the world. They saved the world. All because Benedict decided not to go home. So, I think there are other styles, of course, the Ethiopian style, which is just, it's strange and mysterious and wonderful. And it kind of starts from the Coptic style, but you know it's Ethiopian by the end. Just as you knew, hey, this one's Irish, hey, this one's Anglo-Saxon, this one's Romanesque, which was the thing that was happening in beautiful Spain. And there's not a lot of places I would like to go, but I would love to go to Spain. I would love to go to Spain. They're beautiful people. I love the language, and the food looks really good. I think their wines are really tasty, the ones I've had. So, yeah, I would love to go to Spain. And also, the Holy Grail is there. I'm not kidding. I truly believe it. So, and there's a Syrian style. And then you get to East Syria, because, you know, we're West Syrian, which is to say I'm Oriental Orthodox. I'm not Eastern Orthodox. I'm Oriental Orthodox. Ooh, you still love it. We've got icons. We don't have as many as you'll find in a Byzantine church, but we've got them. They're there, just not as many. Are we losing out? Maybe. But, you know, we do what we do. And basically what we do is try to hold out against the people that want to burn all of our temples and our books and cut our necks. Yep, that's what we're trying to do, is stay alive. And it's why the East Syrians don't really have icons. You might see an icon of the Theotokos, the God carrier, the Blessed Virgin. You might see one of those, but you're not going to see much else, except in miniatures in manuscript. And those, while they're images, they're not images for veneration. And this is what divides the icon as reminder to icon as means of participation. Now, I don't know a lot of Christians of any stripe who would blanch at kissing the Holy Cross if it was part of a service and it was on Good Friday and we were all invited to come and kiss the cross and say thank you to Jesus for your life-giving sacrifice. Who's going to blanch from that? Oh, there'll be two or three. But they're kind of stuck. Their heart is telling them to do it. It's their mind that's saying, no, no, doctrine, doctrine. Well, it's not good doctrine. Come kiss the cross. Is that worship? And the answer is no, you're not worshiping the cross. But you are venerating it. That's a difference. There are churches where worship consists really of veneration. Does God receive it? Yes. Of course he does. It's directed to him in love. But it's veneration. It's not worship. How can you tell that it's veneration and not worship? There's no sacrifice. There's no sacrifice. Is it still good? Is it still worthy? Yes. Is it praise that's offered to the Lord? Yes. But worship takes a sacrifice. And you never, ever, ever, well, the 23rd of April is the feast of the holy trophy-bearing martyr, George. Great saint, really important saint. The way you can tell that you're in an Orthodox church is there are boys named George and Nicholas. That's how you know you're there. It's George and Nick. Okay, it's Orthodox. But when we offer the liturgy, which includes the holy sacrifice, that's what Qurbana means. When we offer the holy sacrifice of the Eucharist, we're not offering it to St. George. We're offering it to the Father by participating in the sacrifice of the Son. That is worship. Nobody worships an icon. We venerate it. We go up, we stand in front of it, we make the sign of the cross. By the way, you'll notice Oriental Orthodox, I'm doing that left shoulder first, not right shoulder first. That's Eastern Orthodox. We're like the Armenians. Left shoulder first. We bow, we kiss the icon, or when we're worried about spreading germs, put your forehead down on the icon. And then you make the sign of the cross again. And do it carefully. Don't make the sign of the banjo. Make the sign of the cross. And then you can offer a prayer, but before you can offer a prayer, after. And but that's how you venerate an icon. You're telling the saint, thank you for all the times your prayers to Jesus, all the times you've gone to Jesus for me, all the times you've gone to Jesus for our parish. Thank you for those. Thank you for watching over us. Thank you for taking us under your protection. Once upon a time, in the bad old days, and don't let anybody tell you they weren't bad, heathenism was awful. It was the worst. Thank God Christianity changed to that. It took a while, but we finally even did away with most of slavery. It wasn't a pagan nation that did away with slavery. It was a Christian nation. It was two Christian nations. Britain first, then we joined in. And then gradually everybody else. And the non-Christian nations had to join that if they wanted to trade with us. So I'm straying off course. I'm sorry. The important part is veneration. Veneration, it's not worship. But that veneration is due to the saints. That veneration is certainly due to the Holy Cross, which is the battlefield where Christ defeated death and sin and fear. And it is also his wedding bed where he married the church. Remember, they opened his side, blood and water came forth. That is the church, man. That's the Eucharist and baptism, blood and water. It was St. Augustine of Hippo that pointed that out to me. And am I grateful to him? Of course I am. That his word spoke after 1,500 years. They're still speaking. That man's worthy of veneration. They still lead us to the Lord. That is what icons ultimately do. They always lead us to the Lord. You don't look at an icon of a saint and not think of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my point in this. You don't look at an icon and not think of Jesus. And veneration is wonderful, but it's not the same thing as worship. And that's it. I'm done. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. The yes, in the West, we took more as the iconography, the image, and for us, what became very prominent would be statues, and and we're talking about religious articles, and uh, you know, I think of whether religious articles, and I think of statues, and for a few things for us, they're given to us by the church, and therefore the person who is already participating in the life of Christ through the sacraments, and we're going to talk more about that in more detailed in part two. But for us, religious articles and statues help us, and they allow us to participate in the life of Christ, in His redemptive act of love and mercy. And as both of you mentioned, we don't worship our religious articles. We don't worship our statues. We venerate them because they're given to us by the church to be able to better participate and receive the very grace that we undeservedly do not deserve, but yet are gracious enough by God to be able to participate. Since Father Richard had a show and tell, I thought, I have a small statue here of Saint Michael, the archangel, and spearing. I don't know how small it is on here, Satan, and this statue for me is the image of Saint Michael is so important to me personally, as are many of the images, because it simply helps me to know of the protection, the mercy, and the love of Christ, and how He works through so many, but He works through the angels. He works through Saint Michael, who is there to serve Christ, and to do so by protecting humanity, protecting us from sin, to protect us from the temptation, of the evil one. I think Ethan, well, both of you, but Ethan pointed out about in Exodus, and some of our non-Catholic friends, Protestant friends, not all, but some will point out chapter 20 in Exodus, where God commanded not to make any graven images to be worshipped, to have images of, even says heavenly things and so forth. So it would seem like we're going against that, but yet the key word, as Richard used so often, is worship. We don't worship. I don't worship Saint Michael. I don't worship the statue. They simply are there to be able to help me not to forget of who Christ is. And and for us even to go to Mary, I have another image which will maybe talk a little more, but the rosary, the rosary beads, sometimes people will, sometimes some will say, well, you're worshiping Mary. And it's like, no, Mary would not want that, because, and I say this very, strongly, and I tell people, if you want to get to know Christ, I mean, if you really want to get to know Him, if you get to know His mother, you have no choice but to get to know Jesus, because that's her whole life. I mean, her being the first disciple who said yes to God, the incarnation, the annunciation, said yes to Him, that reverberated more than we could ever imagine. And
All
so,
generations shall call me blessed. And yes,
yes,
we do.
oh yeah, and these, I mean, so and because for those who look in the scripture, because even 5 chapters later than chapter 20, God commands that 2 images of angels be made out of gold to be put on the ark. So, so obviously we look at the context of what in what God desires. But um, I think Ethan, I would say for me, I think says it the best from a Protestant point of view is that to be able to look at you know to maybe further we look at an Orthodox or a Catholic, and to be able to to really look at how do they understand the statue, how are they using it, you know, and it doesn't mean it might, I guess, be a part of someone's daily life, uh, but a Catholic and an Orthodox, our veneration is to be able to come to that daily worship of Christ. And I'll say, and I'm not saying there are. I'll do us and Catholics. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't Catholics that uh, don't worship inappropriately in the sense of maybe Mary and statues and that. But that is not how the church understands it, uh, and the church gives us and blesses. We think of the incarnation, pretty much anything material, seasonal. The church blesses to be able to bring a person and to realize how they are called to participate in grace. Um, so yeah, I'll leave it at that.
You raise an important point, Father, that these things are incarnation.
Right.
There's a spiritual reality that is being grounded, not restricted to, but made manifest more sharply to our dull senses. That is when we have an icon, when we have a statue. By the way, there were statues in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. Just saying that, they make that reality more noticeable to us, so that instead of stumbling along heart blind, instead the eyes of the heart are open. And that's the really great thing, I think, that icons do. They open the eyes of the heart. I don't want to say there's this image of the Eastern Church that we're all heart and no head. That's not true. Boy, we've got some amazing intellectuals. We really do. But we're not head bound. And dear, dear friends, don't be so head bound in the writings of your fathers. Looking at you, John Calvin, don't be so bound up in their words that you miss what only your heart can perceive. There. That's Statues do that for us. Icons, flat icons, do that for us. The Holy Cross. And do you know, you never have to bless a cross.
Mhm.
A cross is automatically blessed because it's the cross. That's it makes it real to us. It makes it real to us. Like going to Gettysburg. It makes it real to us.
Well, talking about making it real to us just expands the notion of iconography. Father Brian, you used the Archangel Michael. I can hear a generic Protestant voice ringing in my head, going, "Well, sure. So the Archangel Michael and that statue reminds us what? It reminds us that we're in spiritual battle, that
Mm-hmm.
and that we are both responsible to participate and we are protected. Oh, well, we can get that just from reading the Bible, can't we? Well, yes, we can if we are verbally mentally aroused in that way. If, on the other hand, we are more visual, then an icon like the statue of the archangel is going to drive that point home better to us than reading St. Paul's description of the armor of the gospel. And those things are vitally important for us to read, but having an image that reminds us this is a spiritual battle. Or much more recently, think about the incredibly powerful movie that Mel Gibson brought out, The Passion of the Christ. If you are a believer and by the end of that movie you were not worshiping, then
Uh-oh.
there's something wrong with you, because in many ways that is a movie icon of the crucifixion. And it's not, we don't worship the movie, but it's really hard to watch that movie and not worship. Um,
Well,
and
that's great.
so, there are other things like that. It's not just restricted to one medium, or um, and we get critical of each other, sadly sometimes. And I have to raise my hand because it's mostly coming. The criticism of iconography mostly comes from Protestants who don't recognize it within their own circles, and don't understand the power that these kinds of, maybe the word you were hunting for that I had used earlier, Brian, was touchstone. But the way that icons allow us to focus in the same way that the phylacteries did, or tell a story, the way the graven images on the Ark of the Covenant. Those were graven images, but they weren't graven images to be worshipped. And they told a story. They reminded us of the majesty of God, the cherubim. Look, read through the Old Testament description of God's intricate, detailed instructions for the construction of the ark, and then the tabernacle, and later on the temple. Each one of those is described in excruciating detail. And the artwork, the iconography that is included, that God prescribed so that it would remind us of his majesty and tell the story of what he has done for us. That all comes directly from him. So, as I had mentioned off camera, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's celebrate and use the uh, the advantages of visual and tactile experience to help us have that connection with our Creator, in whose image we are created. Folks, I hope that this discussion has at least given you something to think about, something to enjoy, and hopefully it opens up new ways for you to experience God's presence and, in fact, to worship him. we are going to discuss another related topic in talking about religious articles and how that leads us into the sacraments. That's going to be our topic next time. So I hope you guys will join us as we continue this conversation in a slightly different direction. And until then, we all hope you will light something you like. Enjoy this week.